Same wine, but Wine and Weeds is back.
Don't force me out of bed in your society. Don't push me down the road you're playing down. Don't try to fix my head, it's just your anxiety.
So you guys have weeds, and I have wine, so we better do some Wine and Weeds. Welcome back to another, let's call it a season, of Wine and Weeds, in which me and my garden friends walk around and look at what weeds we have and what we're drinking, which is not always wine, but it is in this case. This is the same damn wine I was drinking last year, which is my Whitehaven knockoff Sauvignon Blanc, which is the Kirkland brand. It's cheap and it does the job most nights. So we've got hot Wine and Weeds action for you coming this year, but let's ease into it a little bit. And for this first one, we're not going to be pulling any weeds. We're just going to be identifying weeds, because half of the battle of figuring out what weeds you have to pull and how to deal with them is knowing what they are. And you will come to know the weeds in your garden. They might be different from the ones I have. They probably are. But you will come to know what they are. And that way, when you see a weed that isn't one of your sort of familiar foes, you know something bad is up. All right, let's take a walk around and look at some weeds. Well, right here we have one that many of you probably recognize, and it is everywhere. This little guy is a maple seedling. That's what they look like, and see, it's already starting to get its leaves. So maple trees and other trees tend to shed a lot of seeds when they're feeling stressed. It's like their natural reaction to the need to proliferate. So if they're in some sort of stress, sometimes you'll get a year where there's a whole bunch of them. Well, I guess the drought that we had last year, and by the way, again, I always put an asterisk by drought, because when I talk about the drought that we have in Wisconsin, it is nothing compared to the true and terrible and ongoing drought that many people have, especially in the western part of the United States and in other places in the world. Anyway, there's a lot of maple seedlings around. They're really easy to spot. It's worth pulling them, because if you don't, they become little maple trees, and then they're really hard to pull. Here's one I think we featured last year. This is Wild Violet. It's got these kind of rounded, sort of spade-shaped leaves, like a spade on a, not like a terrible plant, but pretty weedy here. It does actually have some pollinators that really rely on it. So if you really want to grow it, and I don't, I'm sorry, put it in an area where it can run around and do its thing and you don't care about it, because there are benefits to that plant. It's also a pain to dig up, because it's got this really like knobby bit right at the roots. There's a lot of those around too. I tell you what, this time of year is great for looking at weeds, because they're pretty easy to spot, because not a ton of them are up yet. Speaking of which, moving over here, I've walked, by the way, all of 10 feet so far. See, I recognize this guy right here with these two. Those are the cotyledons, and the real leaves are hiding underneath that. So the real leaves are coming here. That's jewelweed, and if you didn't recognize it by the round leaves, you might recognize it by this clear sappy stem. I'm sure I covered that one last year too. Very easy to pull, but still a pain and gets thick. Okay, what else can we find? Oh, by the way, since we're here, where we've got maple seed, where we've got a little bit of everything, I just want to show you something that is absolutely not a weed. Can you see these little guys right here? Tiny little, like those are, hopefully you can see these. Pretty sure those are poppies. I sowed a lot of poppy seeds here. I'm pretty sure those are poppies coming up. And they haven't quite taken on their blue color yet, but don't weed those out if they're somewhere where you thought you sowed some poppy seeds last year. Also not a weed, but looking so good, we should take a look at it. Double bloodroot. It's called multiplex. Isn't it just stunning? They almost look like little, I don't know, roses? What are they? Anyways, they're just, it's fabulous. And over here we've got the single bloodroot, which is also charming, but once you look at it compared to the double. The double's better. Here's one you might recognize. Often on the edge of the beds, creeping in from the grass in my garden. It's Creeping Charlie, also known as ground ivy. Persistent. It will be here for the rest of my life. It's got these little petals that are just tinged purple, and they've got these nice little serrated leaves. I think most of us probably have dealt with Creeping Charlie. It's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world. There's far worse weeds around. Well, we're going to look for some weeds over in this garden, only because the daffodils are finally blooming, and it's really pretty over here. It's just nice to be in here. Look at this one. That's a split corona one. Couldn't tell you what it is, but it's pretty. This is Jetfire, which is kind of an early one that's really pretty. But we're not here for daffodils, we're here for weeds. Let's find some. Oh, how I wish I didn't have such a great example of this. The garlic mustard weed is crazy this year. I can't explain what's going on with it. I thought if I was feeling really good about the garlic mustard weed last year, now this year, big clumps of it popping up everywhere. So we've also talked about this one. This is a listed invasive species if you're in the United States. I think everywhere. So just, you have to pull it. It's not hard to pull. But let's take a closer look at it. First of all, these are all getting ready to bloom. So it's very important to pull these or top them off so at least their flowers don't spread a bunch of seeds. But you can see what their leaves look like. They have this sort of rounded serrated edge, heavily veined, and here, we'll just see if we can pull one. These are all second years. I can tell because they're so big. And I was told that you can tell that they're a second year plant or beyond if they have like multiple roots rather than just one big taproot. So now the good news is that garlic mustard weed is super easy to pull if your ground is even like remotely soft. And thanks to a lot of rain this spring, ours is. Oh, look, that was a twofer. If you look through here, you'll see another thing that I count as a plant in one part of my yard as a weed in another. And holy cow, all of a sudden I'm noticing there's a lot of it. It's ostrich fern, which is not supposed to be growing here, but look at how much is growing here. It's this guy. And it's actually pretty dotted throughout here if it would stay small like this, but it gets huge and it runs everywhere. So I'll have to take care of that. Oh, I don't even want to talk about it. This is creeping bellflower. That's doing really well this year too, despite all my digging last year. You can check out the wine and weeds I did last year on that thing. My advice for it is move. It's just easier than trying to deal with that. It's a miserable one. This guy right here, Dame's Rocket, which is very pretty purple flowers, but doesn't belong in your garden. It is easily confused with like a natural woodland phlox, but it's not. It's bad. There is a native phlox, and this isn't it. It's sort of like a false phlox. We get it growing, at least last year, it was growing all along across the road there, which undoubtedly is where that one came from. Here's an area that has a whole collection of weeds. Oh my gosh. Creeping bellflower on the ground, and the little spikes popping up are lily of the valley. Is lily of the valley a weed? You decide. For me, I'm gonna say yes. It just gets a little too aggressive. It's pretty, and I love a little bouquet of it, so I consider it a weed with benefits. Okay guys, that's it. A little wine and weeds to ease ourselves into. We don't have to go crazy with the pulling and the fighting of the weeds and all that. Just a little cocktail and some weed IDs. So go out there, go identify some weeds in your garden. It's the first step to getting on top of your weeds, is figuring out which ones are the weeds, and you will come to know them as frenemies over time. All right, cheers. Happy Friday. See you in the next Wine and Weeds.